with every release of Mastercam, we try to kind of come up with a game plan or a roadmap, if you will, on how we can make the product better. So it's kind of the opposite spectrum of the 3D printers, where that's a brand new industry. A lot of patents have run out, so the market's kind of wide open now. And so Mastercam being a very mature product, how can we make it better day to day for you guys to use? So these are kind of the 5 main topics we focused on for 2019. And we're going to cover about half of this in today's webinar and the other half tomorrow. But hopefully these improvements you guys will see can provide some value to your workday. So let's get into the job prep and setup part of this. So I'm going to be hopping in and out of Mastercam. Certain topics like this one, the first slide, is going to be, just a PowerPoint telling you guys about it, and you can kind of find out more from there if you have an application for it. But, and also this is not a comprehensive of everything that's new. I would have to have about maybe a 4 or 5 hour webinar both days to cover everything. So I'll have a link at the end where you guys can check out the website that Mastercam builds out that has everything that's what new kind of broken out into a nice, easy to follow along site. So the first change, so model-based definition support. So we could bring these in previously as entities, but they came in as many different entities instead of actual annotations that you could edit. So we now support it. You used to be able to get this through one of the Verisurf plugins that could tie into Mastercam, if any of you are familiar with that, but this is now native and built in to Mastercam, and it pulls it off of view sheets. So if someone creates an MBD setup in CATIA, let's say, and there's 4 views set up for the part that are all dimensioned out, it'll automatically bring those right into Mastercam as view sheets. And if any of you have attended my in-person webinars, I kind of hammer on the view sheet functionality in Mastercam every time, and I can show you guys that a little bit in the software later too. So just a quick example here. In 2018, this MBD annotated part would come in, there's 18,000 lines almost in one solid body. And then in 2019, it's just 22 annotations and the solid body. So anytime you have a CAD system, it's trying to track every single entity in 3D space all the time. So if any of you have gotten a part that have 1 million solid bodies or a ton of wireframe, the system can basically slow down because it's trying to track all those entities in real time. So if you try to rotate the part or change views, it can really slow things down. So a very involved part with a lot of annotations that can really speed up here. So the next one, and this is one of the highlights for me. I've already had a couple customers put this into use. So it's called section views. And instead of talking about the slide here, let's hop over into Mastercam. Oops, not my, here we go. So I always gotta be mindful to wait for GoToMeeting to catch up because I don't want you guys to be not seeing exactly what I'm talking about. So let's take this example, and this can be used in mill or lathe or really any of the Mastercam products because it's plane based essentially. But before, if I wanted to view this ID turning part, or say I got a milling part with a deep pocket in there or an internal feature where I have a customer coming up on Friday where they want to see how this drill is going to be interacting in basically the bottom of a manifold body. So what we can do here is you go to your planes tab and you now have a 5th column here called section view. So I can turn the section on and off, but I've had some people already ask me that it doesn't work. Well, you got to go over to your view tab and turn on section view. So kind of like some of the other options on the view tab, it's blue when it's on and it's gray when it's off. So if I turn on the section view here and click on my plane, I can see how that plane's set up. So it's all based off of the plane. So if I right click the plane here and edit it and say I move it out in Z a little bit, you'll see that it's snapping to some entities there. But you'll see that it updates throughout as I pull it along. So you can really get granular in exactly where you want that section view to display. But in turning, for example, I can just do it right at the center line of the part. But I think in mill, you guys will be able to, I think you'll get a good idea there of, being able to set it exactly at the right Z height, for example, of where you want to slice the part. And even though it's sliced like this, I still have the rest of the full functionality in Mastercam. So I can do, backplot, verify, anything like that, and be able to see without having to, previously, if I didn't have that, I would have to maybe go to like hit Alt S or go to like a wireframe up here on the view tab and being able to see it that way. But then you lose a lot of detail of the part that you might not want to. So that's the quick rundown on section view. Oops. Material rendering. So you guys have probably seen this. I believe it came out in 17 or 18. Well, prior to that, if you said you wanted a metallic view, for instance, everything in your CAD window would be metallic. And that, looks cool, but it's not really that useful. So in 2019, you can do it basically by solid feature or by face or by separate solid bodies. So the example I have here is, let's say I have this part here, I think it's a 3D trackball mouse. You guys have probably seen me demo on before. I have plastic on kind of some, or glass on some of the outer faces so I can see some of the internal features in that part. So it can make it nice for, kind of like the section view concept. How can I get better views within my part if I have a lot of internal features going on? So the next one here is edit surface. So this is some functionality that we added on the next couple slides, kind of tie into the partnership we've had with Verisurf for a long time. Basically just, and they've been kind of the pros at some advanced surface creation in Mastercam over the years. But we now have what's called this edit surface command. So you basically get controller node points, they call it, to manipulate surfaces. So if you're trying to repair a model, if anyone's like a 3D mold guy and you're trying to fix a junky step file that you got, or IGES model, you can really kind of fine tune that surface instead of trying to draw some wireframe exactly right in order to get the surface to say blend to another surface. And I know a lot of us like to work in solids now instead of surfaces, but we all know, especially in the mill world, that they have their place. So the next one, and I have an example file of this, it's called Power Surface. So it essentially is another option to create surfaces in Mastercam. Again, it was functionality that we pulled over from Verisurf, and it's just right in the Mastercam interface. But this particular example I have, I think, is a good way to show that. So let me pull up my Mastercam and drop that file into here. Turn my shading back on. So if I wanted to create these two surfaces with the existing Mastercam options, it would, for lack of a better term, be a pain in the butt. So, I could do like a sweep and then trim the surfaces together. Well, Power Surface, I basically just have to chain exactly what I want. So pick the chain, say OK, and then it automatically fills in a surface there of what I want. And you have a lot of control here then if I want to kind of fine tune that surface. How much do I want it to blend or stick out, and so forth. I think I'm losing part of my Mastercam screen here. Sorry, some technical difficulties. Let me hop over back to Mastercam here. So if I want to fill in this surface as well, it would also be difficult. But the additional functionality I want to show here is if I chain the outside of this and say create it, it's just going to pick its best representation. So if I unshade this, you guys will be able to see there, you know, it's not really, it's basically sticking out farther than I want it to. And I could try to play with, you know, the stretch and bend commands or the extend surface command. But my other option is, and the nice part about this is it's easy to use, is I can essentially draw any additional control I want. So I can have a line here that I drew that's maybe an intersecting point. You know, this is essentially the center of this radius over here. So I want to make sure that this cap I'm putting on matches up that radius around the corner. And then these points here, if I go into this view, these were created on the center of this radius here, you know, via like an arc or spline command. So if I go into the power surface now, I chain the outside, and then I basically add any additional control I want. So all I have to do is pick those 4 pieces of geometry, say OK, and then you guys should be able to see there that it matches up with those control items exactly. So then you're exactly where you want that surface to be. So hopefully you guys can see some of the applications where that can be helpful if you're working with surface models. And let's pop back into the PowerPoint. So some additional on-screen controls. If any of you saw or attended one of our 2018 rollouts, you know that we've been basically switching to what's called this panel interface for a lot of the functions. Well, the main reason behind that is that it's able to take into effect all the additional selection and control tools we have with all the different features. So the example that we've added in 2019 here is both bolt circle and create letters function. So before, if you were creating a bolt pattern and you wanted to know, like my picture example here, what angle I needed to start the bolt pattern at, well, it was kind of a guess and hope sort of scenario. And then if it wasn't what you wanted, you'd hit the undo button and then redo the bolt pattern and keep doing that until you got it exactly the way you want. Well, now with the on-screen controls, I can basically click and drag, and you know, even use an intermediate point, you know, that we've added where you can hover over a piece of geometry and you'll get that little green plus sign, and then you hover over another piece and then it'll give you an automatic midpoint without drawing anything, and some just additional controls like that. So another one we've added some additional functionality to is whole axis. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback from whole axis since we released it a couple versions ago, but one of the main feedback is that it didn't support anything except for perfect straight through holes. So if it had any sort of taper to it, the function basically wouldn't work, and you'd have to use the old methods to create your either axis geometry or other geometry that you would need for maybe a plane or a vector for like a 5-axis application. So it works on all of those now. It also, you can add a vector distance for spot drilling. So you'll see on my left-hand side of my screen here, I got the spot drill vector length, and this is a metric file, but it's basically allowing for, you know, if I want to use the same spot drill across the whole part, I can pick it and then not even have to worry about a Z depth, for instance. And there's also now an all holes option. So, you know, we added like a shift click option, I believe in 2018, but now you can just say pick every hole on the model if I want. So the next function here is called solid hole. So this is basically a quick way to create features in a solid where before you'd have to do, you know, draw some wireframe, extrude, extrude, add boss, whatever the function was. And there's a lot of built-in templates and different hole styles in here as well. So let's switch back over to Mastercam and load our start hole file. Outline shaded. Okay, so I have my part here, and I go to the Solids tab, and it's right here called Hole. And now I basically have to select what I want to cut and also what plane I'm coming from, and then I can start getting into hole types. And I can change these after I've picked the location I want as well. So let's add positions here. So anytime we're in these new panel interfaces as well, for some of you that might be using older versions of Mastercam, anytime you hover over any of these for just a split second, it's going to tell you exactly what that selection tool is. So add position is what we want to do. So I can use, you know, also since I'm in the panel interface, I have all my snapping and control tools, but I could do them all the way around, but let's just do these two for example's sake. And like always in Mastercam, make sure you're mindful of what the command prompt box is telling you what it needs. So I'm done picking, press enter when done. Okay. So now I'm just having kind of a straight through hole there. This is a metric file again. A lot of the example files Mastercam gives me are metric because they try to cater to our worldwide audience. But instead of just a simple hole, let's do a counter bore. And you notice, okay, it kind of wiped away the part. That's too big. Well, let's make it 5. And then it'll also update for kind of a common counter bore, you know, is double the size of the drilled through hole. So, but I can edit that, you know, if I want to make my counter bore diameter 11, it'll make it a little bigger, and then, you know, it's right up against the edge of the part there. If I'm done, I can say apply, but then it'll keep me in the command. Say I want to do this hole up here. You know, before you'd have to flip planes, draw some wireframe, but I can just say select a face, pick that face here. Now my plane, it automatically updated the front. If it was not a already known plane, it would essentially create one, and then you could give it a name there. But let's add a position. I have a piece of wireframe here just as another example, so you can pick it, you know, or I could use the automatic geometry snaps. So that's the hole I want. And let's say instead of using a hole style, I want to use a template, just to show you guys the other half of this example. So I can go to inch, even though I'm in a metric file. We'll say, let's go to, you know, a UNC standard tap, and let's search for 20, because I know that'll pull up my quarter 20 tap. So I say quarter 20, it's automatically going to make the right size drill through hole for like FBM drill, for example, to pick up, and also give me my edge break there. So I can say okay, and then I basically have those two pieces of geometry created. And we don't. I'm just pausing here to check to see if we have any questions. Looks like one of our customers picked up a 3D printer recently, and they're very excited. So are we. We're going to have a couple in our office here in Illinois, and the metal one is going to be down in our Indiana office. So if you want any examples printed, like, hey, is this soft jaw actually going to work? We can print it for you. So let's hop back into the PowerPoint here. Let me check on time. We've gone about 30 minutes so far, so we're good. So analyze solid face. This is kind of a small update, but one that I decided to include in the PowerPoint here because it basically gives you some additional options for maybe editing the color of the face. You know, before you would have to, I don't even know how you did it before. Once I get used to using these new tools, I always forget. But sometimes it would be difficult to pick a certain individual face to assign it to a certain color, because it wouldn't allow for maybe the solid selection mode to be active if you're just kind of in like general CAD interface and not necessarily in a command. So now you can do analyze solid face on the analyze tab, which is on the home tab, and be able to change individual face colors easily. So now bounding box. We've had bounding box for a while. I've been using it for stock setup and just finding out overall dimensions or volume of a part. But before, you had to make sure your plane was exactly right in order to have the bounding box create a box around a part that's not in space exactly the way you want. You know, maybe it came from an assembly or something like that. And so now, kind of like I was doing on the last whole example part, I can essentially pick a face and, sorry, people are walking by our conference room here. Pick a face and allow it to do it exactly at the plane relative to the model. And so this feeds into this model prep align to plane function. So this is a brand new function. It's in the solid model prep tab. And so there's now align to face, align to plane, and then align to Z, which I'll get into those a little bit in a minute as well. But let's show an example of this particular part. So let me go back to Mastercam. Align to plane. So I already did my kind of off-axis bounding box. That's pretty simple. You know, it's on the wireframe tab, bounding box. The last one I was talking about too, analyze solid. That's that slide I was talking about before. And also, this was added in 2018 natively. And in 2019 as well, it was a C hook in 17, but it's called Command Finder. So any of these new functions, if you're having trouble finding it, like let's say align to plane, it'll tell me, okay, it's on the Model Prep Layout tab, and I can click on it, double click it, and it'll take me right to that command. So I can leave this box open and say put it up here where, you know, there's not a lot going on, and I can basically use it like a live Google search for any of my commands in Mastercam. Because I think one of the programmers in Mastercam told me there's a little over 850 commands in Mastercam now. So sometimes it might be hard to find exactly what you're looking for, especially if you're coming from, you know, an older version or a couple versions ago. So it's telling me to select a face. So I want to be planar to that face and select an edge. So I'm going to pick the edge. And then the only other thing I'm going to pick here is I want it to be the top center of that particular part. Now I could create a plane based off of this, or I could transform it to a plane. So let's transform it to, and the one part I cheated here was I already created that plane I want for my horizontal machine example here. So I want to transform it to that plane. It automatically moves it. But my hidden sort of trick here is if I unshade this, there's a model inside of there. So I also want to move that. So there's an option here to select additional geometry. And all I have to do is window whatever I want to pick up. And if I unshade again, it'll pick up anything that's inside that bounding box. So I can use, you know, the example here is if I'm trying to move a part that doesn't necessarily have a planar face or not that many, and would be hard to move, I can create this bounding box first off in space and then bring everything along with it so the part is situated exactly the way I want, you know, in a vise or on a tombstone example here. So it's going to move it, say okay, and then now you know that part's exactly where I want it on the tombstone there. So now model prep align to face. So we had this function in 2018 and it was called solid position, and it was pretty handy. But some of the feedback there is it didn't have as much control as people wanted to put it exactly where they wanted it to. So now I can essentially pick an edge or a line and say align to this face and also align to this plane at the same time. So I don't have an example of this one. Part of that as well is if any of you guys want any of the example files I used in this, I email blasted that to all the in-person rollout people. So if you guys want, I can just include that in the follow-up email to the webinar, or that might already be created. So let me think about that for a sec. If you guys want the files, how about you just email me? It's matts@shopwareinc.com. And then align to Z. So this was originally only a turning option. So once you loaded a lathe machine def, for instance, this was on the lathe tab, and it was called, I forget what it was called. I think you had a turning utility, align solid body. Anyways, the feedback we got was, say you're working on a vertical machine with a 4th axis indexer, sometimes you're going to want to orient the part, exactly the way you want to do some indexing or rotary work. So now it's on that same section of the model prep tab and called align to Z. And I don't have an example of this because it's extremely simple. All you have to do is pick a cylindrical face of the part and then say transform to top, for instance. And then you can basically set where you want your X to be. So, if you want to align the X to say that slot, the center of that slot on the top, you can do that. And then once you say OK, it moves everything along with it. You can create a plane as well, but most of the instances I see people are moving it to the top plane. Because, if you're programming on a mill with a rotary, you want to make sure the part is rotating about the center of rotation of the machine. Don't have any questions yet. Nope. So another one we've added to the panel interface for 2019 is offset chains. So it basically gives you a dynamic view of exactly what's going on with the part. And you can easily offset the chain and see exactly what you want as you edit the parameters of the function there. So let's get into a bit. That was all I had for CAD. So I don't see any real CAD questions in there. But if any of you guys do, feel free to fire them away. So let's get into a little bit of the job management and documentation. So just some updates on the translators. Anyone that's been on maintenance, a big part of the maintenance is the CAD translator update. So as, say, SolidWorks comes out with their 2018 or 2019, they basically allow us to say, okay, you can add this to your software. And so as we come out with updates, we update translator releases. But also what we did was we finally have AutoCAD Paperspace support. So that's a function to add different notes and things into an AutoCAD file. And before they would come in as geometry, but now they're actually what they're supposed to be, which is like a Paperspace file. And you can still convert that to geometry if you really want to. And there's also now, for anyone that has the Pro E translator, you can, it brings in their BREP data. I'm not a Pro E pro. I don't know what that is, but a couple of my customers that do use Pro E gave me 2 thumbs up when they saw that was an option now. So a little bit of level improvements. So the big thing we've added here is the ability to copy and paste between levels. So before you would have to, go into your graphics window, select what you wanted to copy it, paste it, reassign it to another level. Well, now all you have to do is you can right-click the level, say copy entities, create a new level. See my example there? I got level 50, 80, 100, 105. I could create, say, 110 and copy all items from level 80 into 110 without having to ever go even into my graphics window. And we also updated a little bit on the way how all levels turn on and off. You have some control now too of turning off everything but the one you're right clicking on. So I suggest basically going into that levels manager and start right clicking in there and seeing all the new options. And the copy paste also works between the ribbon bar function up there as well. So on the home, very top left of the home tab, you can copy and paste there as well. So anything you've copied from the graphics window, for instance, I could then right click a level and paste it onto the level. So if I didn't want to move everything, I could pick, say, in my example here, I could pick, the actual part model. Maybe I want to flip it for a second op and not fool with the CAD model from the first op, and then just quickly paste it to a new level and go on from there. So you guys might have saw this when I was working on my section view part, but we now have some additional plane settings. So basically what you can do is you can assign colors to the planes as well as a grid to the plane. And this works a little differently from the grid some of you might be used to for drawing. It's basically a good visual representation of what plane I'm in. And, maybe you can standardize it across the shop. Anytime I'm working in the left side, it's going to be purple, the right side's blue, or really whatever you want to do. But that'll pull up on my screen as well next time we get into a Mastercam part file. Scott asked me, how do you rotate between two lines? I'm not sure exactly what you mean there. So if you could expand on the question, I could hopefully answer it better for you. So the section view I was talking about at the beginning of the file, it also supports, that section view is supported both in stock wireframe solid mode. It will also work on the view sheets settings, and it will also help with my next slide here, which is it is also possible to use them in the setup sheets. So with those additions to the section view, we've also added additional data that you can bring into setup sheets. So really anything now, I don't think there's anything now from the NCI file you can't bring in. So those of you that are unfamiliar with that, the NCI is basically Mastercam's cut location data file. So some CAM systems will call it CL data, or really it's what the software is outputting before the post-processor converts it to G-code that's specific to your CNC. So as we expand on these view sheets, we can essentially add additional functionality and information to bring in to the setup sheets. And I won't get into all of them, but there is a tutorial file that you guys can download from our website. And it's the same password as it is to download Mastercam 2019, for instance. It's on our support tab and then setup sheets, but it's ShopWare 2019. So that's all I had for documentation. Let's get into the milling functions here. So some of you might have noticed as you go into drilling in 2019, it's using that panel interface. And I know, like anybody, I've been using Mastercam for over a decade now, and you're used to what you're used to seeing, and anytime it changes, you put your hand to the side of your head and think, oh man, what do I have to learn new now? Well, again, adding this stuff to the panel interface essentially expands our selection tools in Mastercam. So the quick masks, for example, we didn't have the quick masks support when you were doing drill selection in 2018. So if you want to pick, all circles that are red, it was kind of a pain in the butt. So it expands the sorting options as well, and it also support some of the other functions I've not yet mentioned yet, which is like window mode. You know, before you had mask on arc always, which is what I used a lot, but just basically easier selection in there. So it's just, you know, some muscle memory exercise to remember, you know, okay, the button on the left here is mask on arc. That's previous. And, you know, like I said before, you can hover over all those commands so you make sure you know what selection tool is what. So guided chaining. So we added guided chaining in 2018, and it was only on solid models and only in certain tool paths. So we've added guided chaining really across the board. I can't think of an example of a tool path where I've thought about using guided chaining and it doesn't let me now in 2019. And it also works on wireframe now as well. So before in wireframe, you'd have to do like a partial chain or similar. And now you can do it, you know, the same guided chaining. And the quick tip there is once you start the guided chaining and you pick where you want it to start, if you start clicking the X key, it will automatically start moving along. So instead of having to click the little red arrow or click the arrow in the dialog box, you can basically keep mashing the X key to get it to chain around as basically as fast as you can click. The only thing you have to be mindful of is the way the math works on the guided chaining is it's looking for the most logical tangential extension to whatever you're selecting. So if you're running into an area where you want to go up, say, the shorter off-angle section as opposed to kind of continuing along the loop, you'll have to manually switch it by clicking the button on the bottom left of that dialog box there to switch it over. And now we also have advanced toolpath display. And this is one of the highlights for me so far. And it's on the View tab, and I have a little screenshot of it there for advanced display, so you have to make sure it's turned on. My one tip here that I've noticed is, say you have a part programmed in an older version of Mastercam, and you turn on advanced display and everything's still just blue and yellow, just recalculate whatever toolpath that is, and then it'll pull in now that new, basically the database that's in the back end to pull all those colors. And you can customize all those colors as well. And the big handy part of this for me is, you know, as I edit, especially in the 3D HighSpeed toolpaths, you know, that linking page, while it's very powerful, there's a lot going on in there. So I would edit maybe some of my transition motion or entry motion settings, you know, to maybe curve a little more per pass or similar. And now I can turn off everything else but those. And as you can see on my screenshot example here, I get nice, you know, where back in 2018 it would just be more blue. I can see, okay, this is exactly what my lead-in is per pass. The purple in the top here, this is my transition between passes. And then the red is my exit motion before it goes back into rapid. So this works across any of the toolpaths now in Mastercam, like I said, as long as they're calculated with 2019. And you can make these whatever color you want. I've noticed the default colors have been pretty easy to discern and pick up, but I know for, you know, color blindness or personal preference. So the next one is if any of you guys have done, say, OptiRough in an older version of Mastercam and you're using 2019 now, it probably popped up with a warning that you just clicked out of or didn't want to make sense of, and just realized that, hey, it marked my toolpath dirty. Now I got to wait for it to recalculate. Well, part of what that was the skip pocket smaller than on the transitions page of any of the 3D toolpaths. You were limited to skip the pocket smaller than based on an area. Well, it's not easy to figure out an area of a pocket or if you have a lot of pockets on the part. So essentially what we did is we switched the algorithm around to do it based on a percentage of the tool, and then it'll give you that value of what the pocket size is going to be. So again, this is a metric example, but it essentially tells you, okay, I don't want to go into a pocket that's smaller than 370%, as my example there has on the screen. I got a few more slides here before we get into a file that covers all this. And I put a gold star by this one because this is one of my favorite updates to 2019, but it's called Model Chamfer. So before, take a part like this that I have on the screen. If you were doing edge breaking on this in 2018, essentially each one of these would have to be a different operation because you'd have a different lead in, lead out, and maybe retract height. And you would have to, it would almost be a guessing game, or, you would know the diameter of the tool. So then you knew how much to shorten the contour on the lead in, lead out page in order to get the chamfer exactly the way you wanted. So, 2018 added the additional chamfer support for models and already, like a zero length chamfer because the model might already have it on there. But this toolpath supports both of those. And the only thing you have to be mindful of here is it currently only works on flat chains. So chamfering like a 3D profile, which is difficult into itself because, the back of the tool is going to want to wash away the material the steeper it gets. But just be mindful of that. So if it's not calculating or it yells at you, you have to make sure that it's flat geometry. And then the third example on this part I'll be pulling up in a second is a new HighSpeed equal Scallop. So we didn't get out we didn't remove the previous version of Scallop yet, and we probably won't. Even the wireframe toolpaths from the original Mastercam 3D from the early 90s is still in Mastercam. But it's basically a redone from the ground up Scallop toolpath in Mastercam. So it's a lot smoother. The cusp height's going to be better. It handles steep walls a lot better. I've yet to see a use case where the old Scallop is better, but I'm not doing full 3D programming every day. So some of you guys might be able to kind of test the difference between the two. But let's take a look at a file that covers these three topics I just went over. Make sure my screen's all caught up here. Okay. Whoops. Help if I stayed in Mastercam. Okay, so the first one here is that skip pocket smaller than. This one's pretty simple. That was more I just want to make people aware if the toolpath or the file does pop up and it warrants you needs to be recalculated. But it's on the transitions tab here. And then it's skip pocket smaller than. So if I go to my example, like I had in my screenshot there, if I go to 370 here, where right now I'm doing all these pockets and even these tiny pockets where it's essentially just entry motion with this larger tool I'm using, I can update it to 370. It updates the actual volume size. And then I can say recalculate. And then it'll probably do, I think, just 3 of these larger pockets. And I can maybe go back and do the other ones with a smaller tool, or maybe I want to do a start hole or something like that in the other smaller pockets. So the model chamfer, I have a couple tips on this as well. So first tip is use guided chaining. So that's if I go into my geometry here and let's say add a chain. Actually not in here. Let's just do it from the beginning. If I do model chamfer here in the 2D toolpath section and pick, it's first going to kick you. This was my first tip. It's first going to kick you into the toolpath window because there's a couple different pieces of geometry you can pick. So you have your chain geometry, and once you pick up a chain, it automatically adds it to the solid model, and then it's going to give you a clearance value of what you want to avoid on the model that you're trying to edge break. So this is a metric file again, but say I want to say a millimeter from any of these posts that are sticking up where I'm trying to chamfer from. And then next is you can add in what's called an avoidance model. So I say I had clamps or work holding or something like that. I can add as many avoidance models as I want, and then the chamfer toolpath would basically run along, hop over the avoidance, and go from there. So if I go back into some other tips and the parameters of this, so the first tip is on your lead in, lead out tab. So it's going to be simplified compared to what you're used to seeing on the standard lead in, lead out page in a Mastercam contour, for instance. So it's just an arc and a radius, or a perpendicular arc. You know, you guys are used to seeing that. And it essentially just simplifies it. You know, you can add an overlap still, but and you can still extend or adjust the start of the contour, but I haven't gotten into that because it's supposed to be, you know, smarter to figure it out. But my big tip here is what is this fitting distance at the bottom? Well, for lack of getting into a long explanation of how that works, it essentially is how much distance you're giving it to allow the lead in, lead out to work based on your avoidance of the part. So, and metric does make this a little easier to explain. So I am leaving a millimeter of clearance from the solid, okay? And I have a millimeter of lead in, lead out distance. My fitting distance needs to be at least 2, but as kind of a rule of thumb, you know, bump that up a little bit so that it can make sure that it can do the math to fit in your lead in, lead out to the tool path. Because the first time I opened up a file to try to do this on, it wouldn't give me a tool path. I was getting the dreaded, you know, 0.3 kilobyte tool path, and there was no error warning. Well, I already got the request into Mastercam to pop up an error, which, and they know I checked with the mill toolpath manager at Mastercam that they know if your fitting distance isn't big enough, that's why it's not generating the toolpath. So hopefully one of the updates coming out to Mastercam will pop up and say, hey, you need to increase your fitting distance. But since you guys are using it as is now in 2019, that's my tip there, to just make sure your fitting distance is larger than the sum of your lead in, lead out, and your model clearance. And then the next part is the linking parameters. So they're very simplified compared to the normal linking parameters in Mastercam. So right now it's all incremental, since you can basically pick whatever 2D chain you want to chamfer. It's all kind of based off of each other. We have had some feedback of people wanting absolute in there, so I believe that's on the roadmap for, I think, 2020, but I would have to check out, or 2020 version of Mastercam, you know, that'll be out next summer. But anyone that's a customer can hop on the beta forum too. I think Technical Preview 1 of 2020 just came available for people to check out. So that's my tip on model chamfer. I get your question that you asked, Scott. I'll answer that in either at the end or in a little bit. Okay, so let's go. Oh yeah, I forgot there's one more toolpath on here. So we got this is the original Scallop toolpath. So this is the Scallop you're used to seeing in the 3D tab. It says Scallop here. Well, the new one is equal Scallop, kind of higher up in the box there. But so the original Scallop, you know, if you wanted it to scallop up these walls, it would be very difficult. You'd have to fool with parameters forever, or maybe even come back with like a waterline toolpath. The transitions between the passes had essentially sharp movement in there. So, you know, depending on your step over and then surface finish requirements, you might see some witness marks in the part. And also the transitions between, they were smooth, but essentially they're better also with the new one. So if I go to equal Scallop here, you'll see that the transitions are similar, but the transitions inside the actual toolpath are nice and rounded. So, and then depending on what your toolpath filter is, it's not really going to create that much more G code because it'll be a single arc command between those transitions, but they're nice and smooth. If I pick, in my geometry here of this file, I want to machine the whole pocket, and I had the same geometry selected on the other Scallop toolpath, but it didn't want to go up the walls at all. I don't really have to do any fooling around to get it to go up there if I want it to. If I didn't want it to go up those walls, I would just, set those as not drive geometry and maybe avoidance geometry. And I'll get into this setting in another toolpath, but you'll see this popping up in a lot of the 3D toolpath. It's called projected boundary smoothing tolerance, but I have a better example that shows that later on. And you also have this smoothing option here. So I told Mastercam they should probably just have it on by default, but I've yet to see a case where having that off gives me a better result. So just make sure you have the smoothing turns on. That makes sure that the transitions between passes are nice and smooth. And then your Scallop settings are pretty much similar to the old Scallop. What do you want your step over to be, or what do you want your Scallop height to be? And then those are, obviously interlinked. And like I said before, when I was talking about that advanced toolpath display, where I get into this linking parameters page, as I edit these entries, it will update more graphically on the screen of exactly what those are going to be. So let's keep moving along here. We're at about an hour, so I only have, I think, a couple of examples left. So this is the one I was going to talk about here, where I was kind of jumping the gun. Projected boundary smoothing tolerance. Anyone that's done a part like this where it's a scallop maybe walking off of a boss type shape, where you would get essentially some what we call noise in the tool path. So it wouldn't be as smooth as you wanted, and it wouldn't, obviously you don't want that sort of motion on the machine. So you would typically go in there and start fooling with the tool path settings to essentially try to get it to not take that final pass and maybe come back with a different tool path after that point, or edit your containment boundary, or, basically a lot of fooling around to get it to work. And this file, I'll also show this example, just a small one, but might be handy for certain people, is the Analyze tool path that we added a couple versions ago also has support for displaying the tool now. But I'll show both of these in the same file here. So first one is the equal. So I'm using the equal scallop, and then this is without the projected boundary smoothing tolerance. So it's on your toolpath control tab, so you know where you're used to setting your containment boundary, but I have this smoothing tolerance turned off. And you'll see here I get a little bit of noise in the toolpath. And if I have it turned on here, you'll see it actually adjusts the location of the first cut. So you have to be mindful of that. So as you edit this value here, it may edit where that final pass is being taken, unless you hard control it via the Z depth, for instance, with this tool path, or with a containment boundary if I was in more of a flat sort of profile. And another quick tip there, I actually figured this out at IMTS. If I'm doing hybrid finish, because hybrid has it in here as well, if I have hybrid set to do only flats, or I believe it was maybe ignore flats, one of the flats options in there, it wasn't giving me any tool path. Well, the way flats works is tied into how this smoothing tolerance works. So if say you're doing only flats and it's not giving you any tool path, just turn on the projected boundary smoothing tolerance, and then it'll generate the tool path. That's just kind of my quick tip for anyone that's been doing a lot of 3D work. But a customer of mine stopped by the booth and was complaining, and I was just showing him some new features and turned that on, and then all of a sudden flats worked. So Dave, again, the mill product manager at Mastercam, is aware. And like that, anyways, a lot of the updates and enhancements to Mastercam are ones that come from dealers, and a lot of them come from customers that then get fed through the dealers like us. So if there's anything you want to see in Mastercam done differently, or a certain feature you'd maybe want to see, feel free to reach out to us, like our tech team. And then Norbert, who is our tech department manager, basically has a bat phone to the guys over at QC and Mastercam and can put in a request. If it's an issue with the software, we get that logged and can get it fixed. If it's a request, they basically give you an R number, and then we can track that internally to see when that may be coming into the software. So the last part about this file is the Analyze Toolpath. So we added this back in 2017 or 18, and before it was just this. You could drag along the toolpath. It was handy, especially in a file that had a lot of toolpaths going on, to see exactly what operation it is, what maybe my spindle speed and feed is, is my coolant turned on, all different kinds of things. And, we added, I believe in 18 as well, 5-axis vector support. Well, now you can display both the tool and the holder real time in the file as well. So it can kind of be a quick and dirty way to check maybe a depth clearance of the holder, or really anything where you'd want to maybe check a tool clearance, or maybe a tool engagement on a particular part of the part. Maybe I want to shift the toolpath down a little bit, but I can see some use cases there for that particular function. And again, that's on the Home tab, and then Analyze Toolpath. All right, I think this is my last slide for today's webinar, and it's Checkholder. So anyone that's used to using this, it basically was a C hook in Mastercam. So you could hit Alt-C on your keyboard and bring up Checkholder, or go to your Home tab and then run Add-in. And since it was a C hook, it kind of runs through another program where any C hook is supported. C hooks are basically, Mastercam has what's called an API, and really anyone that knows Visual Basic or C+ programming can write any add-in you want into Mastercam. But now that it's integrated directly into the system, we can take advantage of using multiple cores to process. That was one of the biggest feedback of Checkholder, is that it took a while. And it's also just easier to use, and now we can put it into the panel interface as well. But basically how that works is, let me open up the file here. And basically what I have here is, if I go to my parameters and go to my tool, I have a short little stubby tool set to finish this. So I'm kind of setting myself up for failure here. And my tool projection is 1 inch. So I can go to the tool path, say Checkholder here. It's all the way on the right of your Mill Toolpaths tab. And it has my tool projection filled in there. And I can say Perform Test. Now before, with the old C-hook on the same laptop of mine, I think it took a little over a minute to calculate. And now I think it's about 15 seconds or so. So in just my little use example of this, it's about 4 times as fast, but I would want to maybe check on some other files. But now you're going to see a bunch of colors on here. But the important part is I have my safe and unsafe motion. So I can uncheck safe. That's where my little stubby tool can get. This is where it can't. Well, what do I want to do? What it's going to do is it's going to calculate a minimum toolpath projection there. So as you can see, it's 1.29 and then about 15 other digits beyond that, which you don't really need. So my tip here is, if it calculates 1.29 something for your tool projection, you obviously want more clearance than that against your holder. So, maybe do 1.35. And then all I do is say, OK. And then it warns me and says, hey, your tool's been modified. So if I were to go back into the tool path, that updates here on my tool projection page with that tool stick out. So it's just an easy way for me to calculate if I have any clearance issues. And I do have the ability to edit my tool extension further. So if this tool, I don't know what the max extension is on this tool. Okay, yeah, it is 1.35 as the max stick out for this particular tool. So if the tool wasn't long enough, it would warn you that as well, saying, projection is not possible in that given distance. So I'd either have to get a different tool, edit the tool, maybe get a different holder, or so forth. Yep. So that is my last slide. Let me jump into the final slide here. But Aaron asks, is Checkholder available in Mastercam for SolidWorks? I don't think so, but I would have to check. I can get back to you on that, Aaron. And yeah, Scott's question. Oh, good. Aaron was also able to use my X key advice, which is pretty handy. And then I believe the other hotkey, if you hover over that menu, it'll tell you what the other hotkey is to switch the directions around. So if you have an intersection of 3 ways to chain, there's another hotkey to switch those, and then you can get back to Mash and X to get around your part. So the links I have here is our website, and then the what'snew.mastercam.com. And you guys are seeing my other display. Let's swap these. If I go to what's new, okay, let's just go to my browser. What's new.mastercam.com. And it's basically a broken down website of everything that's new. So a lot of the stuff I touched on today is going to be in here, as well as stuff I'm going to be covering tomorrow, and then stuff that I basically didn't include in the presentation for lack of time, essentially. So we're at about an hour and 15 minutes here, which is about what I wanted to do. So they have some videos up on their YouTube channel as well. And then also the link to our YouTube channel, I brought that up at the beginning of the webinar, but a copy of this webinar will be posted there as well.